Hello friends, this is Fox Nival Studios. Today we are here with second chapter. What if Sakura had an older brother who knew things beyond his station? Now let's start the chapter. The job of a Hokage was never ending. Hiruzen Sarutobi yawned as he returned to his office in the early hours of the morning. This was not supposed to be him. He was supposed to enjoy his retirement, spending time with his family and the rest of the clan. He was supposed to relax in recompense for the long years of war and service. In an ideal world, young Minato would have been spending his time solving all these issues while Hiruzen would be resting his old bones. Yet, reality always had a tendency to disappoint. After Minato's untimely demise, there was nobody in the village that was worthy of the office. His two students were off doing what they pleased. Jiraiya at least was still undertaking missions and looking out for the village. Hiruzen expected a lot out of Tsunade, he couldn't lie about that. He hoped that she would step into the shoes of her forefathers and lead the village to stability. But she was drowning in pain. He always thought of her as his daughter and was maybe too lenient on her. The less spoken about his third student, the better. But yet again, the reality was a disappointment. He was awake at this hour, back in his office due to his wayward student. Even if Team Ichigo hadn't found anything worthwhile from the base, he wouldn't have delayed the debrief. He just had to know how far Orochimaru had fallen. The death and misery that he indulged in due to his depravity were partly on Hiruzen's head. If he had only been more forceful, if only he had not held back, Orochimaru would not have the freedom to propagate more pain. Team 15, report, he said the moment he took his seat. Yes sir. At 2345, we began scouting the perimeter. He listened on as Ichigo painted a thorough picture of what they had done in the base. It seemed like the base was dedicated to weapon manufacturing. Ichigo had copied all the blueprints for it, and it looked as if they were all esoteric. The part of him that earned the title of the professor was intrigued by how some of the prototypes specialized in amplifying sound-based attacks. Hiruzen continued to listen without interrupting as Ichigo told him about the various kinds of information he had copied. At the end of his debrief, Ichigo placed a scroll and a black notebook on the desk and fell back in line with his teammates. The storage scroll contains multiple dockets that I copied with the help of my clones, sir. Although, I found something very disturbing while copying it down. I would like to bring that to your attention. I've copied the relevant data into the notebook for ease of reference, said Ichigo. Hiruzen pondered on what he had heard. If it were a base dedicated to human experiments, then the entire thing would be a disturbing experience. Nonetheless, he would not underestimate Orochimaru's deviancy anymore. So he signaled his Anbu to seal up the room and bar entry to anyone. He then activated the newly placed seals that Ichigo had made and waited a couple of seconds. Before you proceed, can this information cause harm to the village? He asked. Yes sir. In fact, even my team is unaware of what I found. I found it prudent to rush as fast as possible and not discuss such sensitive information out in the open, replied Ichigo as his team nodded in agreement. Okay. I have sealed the room, and my Anbu will be monitoring the surroundings. Team 15. Treat this as an S-rank secret until I tell you otherwise. Now proceed, he said. Some might call it overkill, or him being too hasty. He hadn't yet heard what is to be said, after all. But it never hurt to be cautious. Especially after the fiasco with the Uchiha, he didn't want to take any chances. The notebook contains personnel information. I stole from the safe of the person leading the base. I found some alarming points on it, sir. Firstly, many members have been experimented upon. Either some sort of spliced mutation or weaponized prosthetics. The documents themselves didn't have any notes on who performed these experiments, but the leader of the base had made handwritten footnotes in these files. Most of these footnotes mention someone called Kabuto Yakushi as the operating surgeon. I recognize the name, as he took part in my Chunin exams. He was a medic if memory serves right. If the Yakushi mentioned in the notes is the same one as the genin from our village, then we have another spy in our midst. He took part in my Chunin exam too. And yes, he is a medic, noted Yakumo.
I can corroborate. I've worked with him in the hospital a couple of times, said Hana.
Oh. Anyway, I know that it is nothing concrete. But it was an odd coincidence to be left alone. Won't hurt taking a closer look at him, finished Ichigo. Hiruzen's mind on the other hand was running through information furiously. When Root was active, Nono Yakushi was an Anbu working there. She then joined the regular forces as a Jonin captain in the medical corps, and also took care of the orphanage. He would order a search on this Kabuto to see whether it was just an odd coincidence, or if they had another spy lurking around. It always paid to be careful. The whole Mizuki nonsense sure had kicked up a hornet's nest. "I'll order an investigation. What else did you find?" he asked. Another thing that I found was that most of these personnel files contained an evaluation regarding their suitability for an upcoming invasion. These files didn't mention the exact time and place, but I suspect the target to be our village. "Your reasoning?" asked Hiruzen while flipping through the pages, checking out the point that Ichigo had mentioned. Some of these evaluations mentioned suitability for placement into the genin teams. The weird thing was that most of those in consideration were definitely not genin. I get that villages send ringers to exams, but this one seems odd as it is mentioned in the same breath as an invasion. Hiruzen hummed in appreciation. That was a useful piece of information. Jiraiya had reported some interesting information about the newly formed Otogakure. They did suspect that Orochimaru had something to do with that village. But it looked like he was more involved than they had previously thought. Especially considering that Otto wanted to send genins to the upcoming exams. Nonetheless, it looked like they would need to start preparing for an invasion. He narrowed his eyes as he realized that Kabuto Yakushi would be a part of this exam as well, as usual. He would plan his counter-offensive once he went through the entire information and tried to dig deeper and see if he could find more. "Anything else?" he asked Ichigo. "Yes, Lord Third. The last piece of information I found alarming was the personnel file of one Shin Uchiha," stated Ichigo. Hiruzen immediately sat straight in alarm as he riffled through the notebook, traversing through the alphabetically ordered personnel files. His blood ran cold as he reached the page containing the necessary information. Apparently, he was not a true Uchiha, just a fanatic enamored with the name. The picture of the man was unsettling. His skin was pale enough to rival Orochimaru's, his right eyelids were held open by multiple stitches, and the eye was another story in itself. The eye was a Sharingan with a pitch-black sclera. On the other hand, his left eye was a normal Sharingan. Another complication was the 3 Sharingan implanted on top of his head. The further he read this Shin character's file, the more his head ached. He had multiple Sharingan eyes implanted throughout his body. The answer to why the man didn't pass out due to the sheer chakra drain was because he possessed a genetic makeup that nullified any chance of rejection in case of tissue and organ transplants. When he reached the part about the right arm, Hiruzen almost cracked his desk. The arm was implanted with multiple Sharingan and then amputated. Orochimaru had then grafted Lord Shodai's cells onto it. Such disrespect. Merely thinking about it infuriated him on multiple fronts. To top it all off, the arm was now seemingly stitched onto Danzo's body. His first reaction was to write the thing off as a forgery. It seemed so out there, that he initially refused to believe it. Then he seriously thought about it. What if it was true? He really didn't want to think of that scenario. In the end, the job was all about making tough decisions for the betterment of the village. He mentally began listing the ramifications of this information. The most pressing issue was Danzo's apparent collaboration with Orochimaru. He knew that Orochimaru and Danzo worked together before Orochimaru turned traitor, but he couldn't fathom Danzo working with him after he turned traitor. The man was fanatical about the village to an unhealthy degree. So why would he work with a known traitor? But then again, Danzo's view of the world was askew. What everyone saw as reprehensible experiments would have been something that Danzo saw as developing powerful weapons for the village. His old friend had once tried to assassinate Hiruzen himself for the good of the village. At that time, he had let him off with a warning and a promise. Another mistake, it seemed like. In his old age, he had become too forgiving. If the arm was real, and if word got out about it, the clans would rebel. The Hyuga would then ask him what was to stop him from having a new left hand full of Byakugan eyes. They already were a pain with their thrice-damned cursed bird seal. Although, this might light a fire under them to remove the slavery part of the seal and let everyone in the clan wear a seal to protect their eyes. He was not counting on his fellow old fogies to make a sane decision though. They would most definitely be up in arms the moment they hear about Danzo's arm. Now, on retrospection with this new information in hand, it did seem like the entire reason the Uchiha fiasco happened was for Danzo to get his hands on the dojutsu. Shisui would have stopped the clan from rebelling, but Hiruzen always suspected that Danzo had killed the boy to remove that option. He had taken things into his own hands and driven Itachi into committing the massacre when Hiruzen himself wanted a diplomatic resolution. Now though, he thought of the possibility of Danzo taking Shisui's eye for himself. Nobody had seen beneath those bandages for years after all. After the Uchiha fiasco, the Root Division was disbanded by Hiruzen, but Hiruzen still suspected that his old friend had kept the thing active. Why hadn't he ever truly put Danzo under intense scrutiny? He wondered whether it was sentimentality, incompetence on his end, or was it something else? Could he have been affected by the Koto Amatsukami? Was it why he was still hesitating? He took a deep breath and looked at the file once more. Moreover, if Danzo was involved with Orochimaru, he might even be a part of the invasion. If the invasion's main purpose was to assassinate him and place Danzo as the Hokage, then Danzo would definitely see that as an acceptable sacrifice, as long as the village came out strong in the end. He couldn't dawdle about this any longer. The situation could be dire, and he needed to make a decision. This could easily be a forgery, but at the same time, it could also be real. He needed concrete proof. He looked up and decided on his course of action. Ichigo had been asking him for this since forever, but he had let it go because he trusted his friend. Right at this moment though, he needed to think less like a friend, and more like a cage. He could be compromised, so he couldn't trust his judgment anymore when it came to Danzo. Instead, he would trust his other comrades who have yet to betray his trust. Once again, he needed concrete proof. Proof that he would get one way or the other. Sai, step forward, he said. The Tokubetsu Jonin complied without a word and stood in front of Hiruzen. Young man, tell me. What are you loyal to? To the village, to the mission, Lord Third, Sai said without missing a beat. Hiruzen chuckled in response and nodded. So, if I were to give you a mission that is detrimental to the village, you would not take it. Am I correct? Yes sir, said Sai without hesitation. Now, what if your commanding officer has been collaborating with traitors and is causing harm to the village? What would you do then? Hiruzen asked.
That question seemed to stump the young man. Hiruzen observed that Sai seemed to be struggling with the answer. In the end, though, he made up his mind and answered.
I will do whatever is required of me to ensure that Konoha is safe, he said, with a tone of finality in his voice. Perfect, Hiruzen said as he slid the notebook toward Sai. Take a look at this. Go over the points Ichigo mentioned about the invasion and this Shin Uchiha. He waited as Sai read through the information, realization drawing upon the young man's face at last. As you have realized, we are going to be under attack. There are known collaborators of the traitor within the village. I can't act openly against some of them unless I have concrete proof. Some of this information is outlandish enough for me to wait for proof. Will you give me the information I require? Will you help me protect this village from those that seek to harm it for their own goals? Will you protect the leaf? I am willing. Yet, I can't disclose the information you seek, Lord Third, Sai said and then brandished his tongue, displaying the cursed seal that Danzo placed on his soldiers. Hiruzen nodded in response and looked at Ichigo, who seemed to have caught on to what was to be done. Do it. Make sure that it doesn't alert him, he ordered. Finally, Ichigo said exuberantly as he clapped the shoulder of his comrade. He then summoned his Fuinjutsu supplies and got to work. Hiruzen looked on as his mind began plotting the operations that his soldiers would need to undertake concerning the new information. It was going to be a busy few weeks. First and foremost, he would need to summon Jiraiya post-haste. Maybe, after all this hullabaloo died down, Jiraiya would finally spend some time with young Naruto. Kakashi leisurely jumped in through the window and straightened up. As he stashed his copy of Icha Icha, he noticed that almost everyone in the room was glaring at him. Nothing unusual for him at this point. Yo, he waved his hand to no response. Shikaku just mumbled something under his breath while Lord Jiraiya snorted in amusement. Ichigo on the other hand exhaled in exasperation as he leaned back on the wall. 5 more minutes and I would have assigned a heap of D ranks to you and made your genin watch while you do it, grumbled Lord Third. Kakashi couldn't help but think that the rebuke was undeserved. He had almost been on time since apparently it was an important meeting. Well, it didn't matter as long as he didn't get punished. Anyway, now that everyone is here, let's begin, said Lord Third as he activated the new Fuinjutsu array that sealed up the room. Without preamble, he threw several scrolls at the occupants of the room ordering them to read them at once. Ichigo had no scroll in hand and was leaning on the wall, So whatever they were reading must have something to do with his latest mission. Kakashi wasted no time as his eye roved over the contents of the scroll. He was an old hat at speed reading, which immensely helped him catch up on his recreational reading. It was only natural that the skill would help him out in his official duties as well. Some fools would say that he had it twisted and that he could only read fast due to his training. Such pitiful fools would not know that Icha Icha was an unparalleled page-turner that urged you to read faster. As he kept reading the contents of the scroll, all of his laid-back demeanor disappeared and he stood ramrod straight. It looked like the peaceful days were coming to an end. One way or the other, what he was reading would lead to some sort of conflict. His mind immediately went to his newly minted Genin team and how unprepared they were. If any large-scale conflict erupted, they would not survive. The bloodstained faces of Obito and Rin flashed in his mind and he gripped the scroll tightly, almost tearing it in the process. It would not happen again under his watch. A somber mood settled around the room as everyone finished reading their respective scrolls. Without a word, everyone returned the scroll to the Hokage. Such volatile information was better off with him. Not like anyone over here was amateur enough to forget what they read. As you can see, Ichigo's mission has borne some unexpected fruits, said Lord Hokage. Were we able to verify this intel? Asked Lord Jiraiya. Some of it. We have nothing on Shin Uchiha apart from what I found in that base. On the other hand, we were able to verify some of the info about Yakushi and Danzo.
Sai told us that Danzo was absent for a little while a few years ago. He doesn't know the exact details, but Danzo apparently came back with a sealed arm. Other than that, he also told us about several missions that Danzo has sanctioned. Bad stuff all around. Yakushi on the other hand is the most likely suspect who smuggled in the arm and attached it to Danzo. Sai did confirm that Yakushi and Danzo have had contact several times, said Ichigo.
I always told you that the old man was up to no good, grumbled Lord Jiraiya, looking at his teacher pointedly. I know Jiraiya, I know, Lord Hokage said in a tired voice. So what is the plan? Asked Shikaku, whose mind was unquestionably going through multiple scenarios. Kabuto Yakushi obviously has ties to Root. Given that he is mentioned in the files we got from the hideout, it is safe to assume that he is Danzo's liaison in Orochimaru's camp. If we move against Danzo, Kabuto might get spooked and abscond. He'd go running to Orochimaru, stated the Hokage. And if we catch Kabuto first, Danzo would get spooked and do something to save his hide, finished Shikaku as he scratched his goatee. Yes. Apart from these two, this, Shin Uchiha is also a priority target. That's why I want to hit them all at once, said Lord Hokage. Given that you have Jiraiya, Kakashi, and Ichigo over here, I suppose these three will be the squad leaders? Questioned Shikaku. Exactly. I want Kakashi to lead the operation against Yakushi. Jiraiya will be leading a team to capture or execute Shin. If word of his existence gets out, most villages will be willing to go to war for such an asset. I'm sending Jiraiya because there is a chance that they might come across Orochimaru. No offense to the kid, but are you really sending him to confront Danzo and his minions? Asked Jiraiya. Think about it, Jiraiya. If he has Shisui's eye, I can't afford to confront him in battle. Imagine, if he manages to subvert me in the middle of the fight and turns me against our allies, it would be a disaster. Can't he do the same to the kid? He asked. We'll get to that later. Let's decide the team compositions first. Shikaku, what do you suggest? Kakashi sat hidden on the rooftop and observed the site that had been chosen for their confrontation. The street had already been cleared several hours ago. It was on his way home from the hospital and was the optimal location, as it was the farthest point from any route base in Kabuto Yakushi's route. Sure, the empty street might spook him, but it didn't matter. The moment he stepped into the street, his fate was sealed. As the target walked into the street, Kakashi pulled up his forehead protector just in case. He was confident enough that it would not be necessary, but he was told to take this seriously. They could not afford to let this one escape at all costs. Given that he was in cahoots with both Danzo and Orochimaru, and had been prancing around the village all these years, he would have several tricks up his sleeves. He peered at his target using the Sharingan and readied himself for the inevitable. He watched on as Kurenai used a genjutsu to ensnare the target. If this worked, then there would be no fight, but something told him that it would not be so simple. His eye automatically copied the jutsu even though it could do so much better. All he would need was eye contact. Sadly, him walking up to the target and lifting his forehead protector would have given the game away in an instant. If it was one genjutsu that he wanted to copy, it was Yakumo's. It was such a shame that he could not copy it due to it being a Kekkei Genkei. Her genjutsu was without par, the most effective area of effect genjutsus he had ever seen. Of course, it was incredibly potent in a one-on-one scenario as well, but it truly shone when cast over a wide area. The reason why he had Kurenai in his squad and not Yakumo was because right at this moment, Yakumo was covering the areas around the root bases and ensuring that the general population did not catch a glimpse of the shadowy organization. Lord Hokage didn't want word of it spreading. Another reason was that the information regarding Danzo was still a secret and only the team hitting Danzo's location were aware of what they would be facing. Yakumo already knew, and Kurenai did not. It didn't matter though, as Kurenai would have been told if her skills were deemed indispensable for that mission. The fact that Kurenai, a Jonin, was not deemed worthy for that mission while Yakumo, a Tokubetsu Jonin, would be a slap in the face to Kurenai. Ironic, considering Lord Third agreed to seal up Yakumo's out-of-control power due to Kurenai in the first place. Oh, how the tables had turned. He saw how Yakushi got hit with the genjutsu, and how he snapped his finger the next instant. Such a swift response meant that the target was as skilled as Ichigo speculated during the meeting. Without waiting for him to make his next move, Kakashi dashed at the target full tilt and slashed at his back. It didn't seem like Kabuto would be going down easily. The man moved way faster than a genin should be and avoided Kakashi's strike by a hair's breadth. At the same time, a glowing palm reached for Kakashi's neck. Unfortunately for Kabuto, Kakashi easily predicted that and stabbed the kunai into his stomach. He then kicked the kunai so hard that it got embedded into him up to the ring. The sheer force of the blow sent him ragdolling across the street. "That's not an ordinary genin for sure," said Kurenai as she dropped next to him. "Jonin level at the very least," Kakashi added. Both of them moved in unison and pounced at the downed target, hoping to subdue him at once. The moment their blows landed on Kabuto, he crumbled into a pile of rocks. Two glowing hands burst out of the ground, attempting to grab onto both of them. Kakashi easily evaded it since his eye saw it coming. Kurenai escaped the grab as well, but her calf still got grazed, which caused her to wince and stumble. Kabuto burst out of the ground, attempting to strike both of them with the chakra scalpels. But Kakashi got inside his guard before he could do so and lashed out with a punch that sent him flying once more. He looked at the ground and saw his bloodied kunai lying there. A glance at Kabuto showed a hole in his shirt, but the injury had already healed up. The finger that he had snapped to escape the genjutsu seemed fine as well. It seemed like their opponent was not just a run-of-the-mill jonin. A medic that could weaponize their Iryojutsu and also heal themselves midst battle was a tough opponent. He was glad that he had listened to Ichigo's rambling and started off with the Sharingan. It was not like Kabuto would have had the upper hand otherwise, it was just that the eye truly helped him see how much the spy was holding back. It was apparent to Kakashi that Kabuto was faster than Kurenai. And now that her muscle got sliced up, she would be a liability. "Take cover and run interference with your genjutsu," he said as he glanced at her injured leg. But she started, but was immediately interrupted by Kabuto dashing towards them. All of a sudden, a fireball jutsu intercepted the spy and gave cover for Kurenai to retreat. The raging fireball consumed the place where the spy was at. "Good timing, Aoba. Stay at range. Kurenai, play to your strengths," said Kakashi as he ran through a set of hand seals and slammed his hands on the ground. At once, Kabuto burst out of the ground a few feet in front of Kakashi as earthen spikes followed him on the way. The tips of a few spikes were bloodstained and Kakashi could see that the spy was injured once more. Once again, the injuries began healing up on their own. Every passing second, it seemed like capturing the target alive was going to be a hassle. Aoba was the ranged support for the mission since he was good with ranged fire attacks. The timing of his attack gave enough leeway for Kurenai to escape at last. Both of them would ensure that Kabuto could not escape from this fight. So, Kakashi jumped back into action and began engaging Kabuto with a kunai in hand. Typically, it was foolish to engage someone with chakra scalpels in close combat. Alas, his eye helped him predict Kabuto's every move as he kept slashing at vulnerable points while evading any attack coming his way. If it were any other jonin, except for Guy, they would have been sporting several severed muscles at the very least. He could see Kurenai casting her genjutsu on Kabuto and him breaking free by disrupting his chakra flow. It did cost him his concentration as he got battered by Kakashi as a result. He dodged another glowing palm thrust and caught the arm firmly as he smashed his fist into the elbow, shattering it in one move. Kabuto howled in pain and immediately inhaled hard. Kakashi disengaged before the jutsu was even ready. As a parting gift, he speared his kunai through Kabuto's other elbow before backing up. A slew of wind bullets followed him, but he evaded them casually. To nobody's surprise, Kabuto's injuries healed rapidly once again. But Kakashi could easily tell that the spy had burned through a lot of chakra with the latest bout of healing and impromptu sealless wind jutsu. "I'd have gotten you good if you didn't have that damn eye," spat Kabuto as he pulled out the kunai embedded in his elbow with his freshly healed arm. At this point, Kakashi planned to force him to keep healing and empty his reserves. That way, it would be an easy capture. "It seems that I can't be taking this easy anymore," Kabuto said as he raised his now healed hands and speared a line of blood into his palm. He didn't need his eye to recognize the familiar motion. It was a jutsu he was all too familiar with. Any subordinate of Orochimaru who was doing that jutsu would be summoning one thing and one thing only. Even if it wasn't a massive snake, Kakashi could not take that risk inside the village. Moreover, this would jeopardize the important mission that the others were doing at the moment. Without hesitation, he rushed at Kabuto at his top speed, a Reikiri buzzing to life in his right hand. Aoba launched another fireball at Kabuto, and he deftly dodged it. He started doing the hand seals for the summoning jutsu mid-dodge. To Kabuto's annoyance, he was intercepted by a hail of shuriken thrown by Kurenai. Kabuto grit his teeth and dodged a few of them as he completed the hand seals. Several kunai cut into his flesh, but he ignored the pain and went through the motions of the jutsu. Before he could finish executing the jutsu though, Kakashi's lightning-clad hand plunged through his chest. "Hey," he laughed then coughed up a good amount of blood. "Mother, it looks like it's already bedtime." He trailed off as he slumped forward, leaning on Kakashi. For a second, he thought of another medic that he had to kill similarly. But that was where the similarities ended. Kakashi withdrew his arm from the cavity where Kabuto's heart used to be, as every indicator told him that Kabuto was dead. He looked at him for a few more seconds with his Sharingan and confirmed that he was dead. He wanted to capture him alive, but they couldn't risk a massive summon at this stage of the joint operation. It wouldn't matter in the end, as Inoichi could still get what they needed from the corpse. The Yamanaka clan was nowadays on top of their game after all. "Can you walk?" he asked as Kurenai and Aoba descended right next to him. "I think he busted the tendon. I can still hop around on one leg. Just won't be good for a fight," she said with bitterness coloring her voice. Then drop him off at T&I and tell them to keep the corpse fresh for Inoichi. Aoba, relay our mission status and join the perimeter squad, he said as he repositioned his forehead protector to cover his Sharingan. Thankfully, the fight hadn't dragged on for long, and he still had some chakra left. Not as much as he would have liked, but definitely more than he expected. "What are you going to do?" asked Kurenai as she sealed up the corpse in a scroll and stood gingerly on one leg. Right on cue, there was a loud crashing sound, and in the distance, an all too familiar black arc of chakra soared towards the sky. "I'll be going there," he said as he disappeared in a shunshin. Torun Aburame immediately went on high alert as he felt the ground vibrating. He glanced at his partner, Fu Yamanaka, and they both moved out of their hidden locations. They stood in front of Lord Danzo in a protective stance, expecting an attack to burst through. The rumbling kept on going for a while and didn't seem to be stopping, and the whole underground base kept shaking as a result. "Fu, Torun, find out what is happening. Handle it," Lord Danzo said as he stood up from his chair with a grave expression on his face. Without any hesitation, Torun shot out of the room with Fu. Root shinobi were not ones to question their superiors. An order was an order and would be followed. Them not being near Lord Danzo would put him at risk, but they both knew that he was strong enough to hold his own. Even if he wasn't, they'd still do what they were told. The moment they moved out of Lord Danzo's wing, they clearly saw what the problem was. Several new wooden walls had been erected and had blocked various paths. Torun immediately took off his gloves and let his special breed of microscopic Kakaichu flow through his hands into one such wooden wall. The Rinkaichu spread through the wood and began to corrode the outermost layer. But before they could go any further, they started becoming dormant. Unlike ordinary Kakaichu, the Rinkaichu could not operate for long outside his body, so he immediately recalled them back into himself. By the time he had recalled his Rinkaichu, the wall was back to its previous state, without a single scratch. Torun already knew Tenzo's capabilities, so he did not waste time physically trying to break down the wall. "Can't get through," he informed Fu. "A light," said the Yamanaka as he ran through a set of hand seals and let loose a bolt of lightning from his mouth. The jutsu impacted the roof and knocked down chunks of concrete from it. To their annoyance, there was a punctured layer of wood in between the concrete that immediately fixed itself. Torun looked back and saw that the way they came through had also been sealed up with a wooden wall. There was only one tunnel that was not blocked. They glanced at each other and nodded. There was no way that they were going to spring such an obvious trap. Unsheathing his tanto, Torun moved towards the wooden wall and began tearing into it with vigor. He increased the speed so that he could carve through the wall before it could completely regenerate. Right as the cuts began healing, Fu shot the lightning release false darkness jutsu once again. Torun leaned out of the way as he removed his shirt in one fluid motion. His entire torso was purple in color as the Rinkaichu covered his body. The Rinkaichu inside his body had been churning the necessary poison that he then proceeded to concentrate around his palms. Fu's jutsu punched a small through the Mokuton barrier. Before it could start closing up, Torun unleashed the poison cloud jutsu. The poisonous cloud hit the wall and began corroding it just like his Rinkaichu did a few seconds ago. The difference was that there was nothing alive in that cloud for the Mokuton to put to sleep. It still wasn't as potent as it would be against other targets, as the poison was usually fatal with a single touch. Whereas the block of wood began resisting the poison and slowed down the corrosion. It still gave them enough time to dash through the temporary opening. The moment they stepped inside the tunnel, the hole was closed shut by another wooden wall slamming down from the ceiling. Before he could think about his next course of action, a potent wave of drowsiness washed over him. His limbs felt heavy and his mind was incredibly cloudy. As his vision darkened, numerous nano-sized insects pulsed in unison and snapped him out of the genjutsu. He stumbled for a second before his body returned to his control. The Rinkaichu kept pulsing in odd intervals to ensure that the genjutsu did not take hold of him once more.
Torun immediately sent a pulse of chakra into Fu's body and woke him up pronto. It had not even been more than a couple of seconds and they were already under assault from a potent genjutsu. Things looked bleak as he realized that the entire base must have been put out of commission due to the Mokuton and the genjutsu.
It was weird how it did not affect his Rinkaichu at all. He wondered how that happened, but then realized that there was one specific person whose genjutsu did not affect certain organisms like Kakaichu. This newfound information was pointless as several Mokuton branches burst through the walls and proceeded to wrap around the both of them. His focus was split as he expended chakra en masse to counter the genjutsu actively and corrode the wood at the same time. His bindings were suppressing his chakra to such an extent that his progress on both fronts began faltering. As his chakra dipped beyond a certain level, he could no longer fight the genjutsu. The last thing he remembered was watching a purple-haired Anbu wearing a cat mask approaching them. As Fu and Torun left to carry out his orders, Danzo moved towards the apparatus that gave him the status of the base. To his rising annoyance, he found that everything had stopped working. He also felt his connection to the various detection arrays placed around the area crumbling. All of these measures falling apart right at once meant that a high-profile agent was compromised. His mind went through all sorts of scenarios within seconds and he could only find one situation that might lead to anything of this magnitude. He wondered whether Orochimaru had purposefully thrown him to the wolves in order to avoid Hiruzen's attention. Danzo didn't agree with what Hiruzen did to Orochimaru. Mainly because a lot of what he did was sanctioned by Danzo after all. Orochimaru was a valuable asset that did not buy into Hiruzen's foolish worldview, and it resulted in him being thrown out of the village. Now he was no longer a confirmed asset and instead was a threat due to resentment and spite. He still works with him because Orochimaru has a similar mindset to achieve goals and delivers on promises. But if Orochimaru had indeed caused this, then Danzo was most likely about to fight Hiruzen. No upstart terrorist would be attacking a base in the middle of the village. Knowing that he would not be able to overcome Hiruzen in a cramped space, Danzo walked out of his office and sealed it behind him. He briskly made his way to his personal training chamber. It was an inconvenience, but Danzo could easily see how he could turn this around in his favor. One way or the other, he would finally overcome Hiruzen and become the Hokage. He knew that his old friend would not have the heart to go for the kill, and that would be Danzo's biggest opportunity. Promptly, he reached the massive chamber and waited for the inevitable. The metal contraptions that sealed his arm fell on the floor as he prepared himself for what was coming. He left the bandages alone since it would be prudent to keep some of his cards hidden. His wing was isolated from the rest of the base, both with physical means and with Fuinjutsu arrays. Whatever had affected the entire base had not, or could not touch his wing. He would figure out which was the case later on. Nothing happened for a couple of minutes, but Danzo was patient. He stared intently at the entrance, waiting for someone to breach his wing. Instincts honed throughout the years flared at him as he jumped to the side just when a blur rushed past him, leaving behind a shallow cut just above his right eye. The interloper immediately switched directions and began slashing at Danzo with a pitch-black dado. He was momentarily confused how the damn brat had made it into his wing without tripping any of his detection arrays. He kept dodging the sword strikes as he drew a kunai and jumped back. "Jonin Haruno, what is the meaning of this?" he asked as the brat rushed at him, impeding his momentary retreat. "I'd say it's nothing personal. But you decided to fuck around. Now find out," the Jonin exclaimed as he swung his lightning chakra-covered sword straight through Danzo's kunai. The length of the blade ensured that Danzo got a long cut on his torso for his troubles. Undeterred, he moved around in a pattern all too familiar to him and drew in the pink-haired Jonin to the spot he wanted. Ichigo Haruno stopped the moment he placed his foot on a specific spot. Black lines began to rise from the ground and began traveling up his leg. Unfortunately, he released a burst of chakra that got rid of the binding seal. "Fuinjutsu traps? On me? You must have really gone senile," said Ichigo as he rushed towards Danzo once more. It was too late as the momentary delay was enough for Danzo to whip out another kunai and infuse it with the wind-release vacuum blade. As the wind blade and the lightning-covered black blade clashed once more, the wind overpowered the lightning momentarily. But before Danzo could capitalize on it, Ichigo stopped the lightning chakra flow and instead coated the sword with fire element chakra. The difference was palpable as the next time the swords clashed, the black sword easily overcame Danzo's blade of wind. As they were engaged in a deadly dance of slashes, he could see that most of the attacks were being targeted towards the right side of his face. Frowning at the placement, Danzo inhaled and released several blasts of wind that scattered in front of him, intending to turn Ichigo into a pincushion. Danzo ran through a set of hand signs as Ichigo barely dodged the piercing attacks, accumulating several cuts in the process. Without giving him time to breathe, Danzo twisted his torso and let loose the vacuum wave jutsu. Several blades of air rushed towards Ichigo at an astounding speed. But before they could reach him, they were consumed by a massive wave of fire. The fire grew in size as it consumed the wind jutsu and headed towards Danzo. He clicked his tongue in annoyance as he understood what Ichigo's tactic would be. The Jonin would just try to counter his wind with fire and attempt to win in an elaborate game of rock paper scissors. He scoffed in derision at that realization. Danzo hadn't survived 3 wars with just one element in his arsenal. Focusing his chakra into his stomach, he inhaled deeply as he ran through another set of hand seals. Right as the fire neared him, he exhaled a veritable tsunami. He smiled sardonically as he realized how rusty he had gotten. The jutsu wasn't as chakra efficient as it used to be. Lord Tobirama would be ashamed. Nevertheless, the exploding water wave jutsu extinguished the flames and went onwards to submerge Ichigo. Knowing that his adversary would escape the jutsu, Danzo began executing the complex motions for a follow-up jutsu now that he had a lot of water to work with. As the wave crashed on Ichigo's position and continued onwards, Danzo began molding the water close to him. Within a few seconds, a tall dragon made out of water stood in front of him. Without preamble, it shot towards the same spot at great speed. To Danzo's surprise, at the moment of impact, the dragon and the water surrounding that spot vaporized into a massive wall of steam. He could practically feel the temperature even at this distance. There was a pulse of light, and the temperature spiked even further. All the steam was blown away as a result, only to reveal an Ichigo bathed in fire. A corona of fire surrounded Ichigo, growing in intensity with each passing moment. The next instant, Flames exploded from his back as it propelled him toward Danzo at a dizzying speed. Danzo moved just in time as the living meteor collided with him. He managed to avoid the worst of it, but he got skewered by Zangetsu regardless. It dug deep into his spleen and the sheer heat began cauterizing his wound. He grunted in pain right as he was punched in the face and thrown across the chamber.
Before he could stabilize himself, he heard a booming sound as the heat neared him once again. A kick from behind sent him tumbling forward. Another bout of explosion rocked his ears right before he got punched again. Propelled by the explosive force of the fire, Ichigo began pummeling Danzo, leaving behind burn marks in the shape of his fists and his feet. It took every bit of his mental fortitude to avoid the killing blows from the sword. But it didn't stop him from getting injured.
It was like a flaming meteor blitzing at him. The sound, heat, and non-stop pain began to overwhelm Danzo as he nearly reached his limit. With an almighty roar, he ripped open the bandages around his head and looked at Ichigo with Shisui's eye. If the upstart thought that he had an advantage due to the speed, then Danzo would take that advantage away from him. What he saw though, was something he did not expect. The moment he opened the Sharingan, Ichigo's mouth warped into a malicious smile, as if he was waiting for just that moment. The next moment, Danzo almost shut his eye as his head threatened to explode. The chakra inside Ichigo was completely obfuscated as if it were covered by a thick membrane of what seemed to be foreign chakra. What made matters worse was that the membrane of chakra strobed with intensity, almost blinding him due to the brightness. All he could see was a bundle of light shaped in the form of a human being that kept flashing in intervals. The fire jutsu surrounding him was just icing on the cake, and he finally closed his eye in frustration. Performance issues? It's pretty common in your age group, the insufferable brat drawled in an amused voice. Without waiting for a response, Ichigo blasted toward Danzo once more and kicked him upwards. Danzo could feel his jaw shattering as his body flew towards the ceiling. He was bruised, burnt, cut, and now sporting broken bones. He was seriously considering the merit of saving his reserves for when Hiruzen would inevitably come through. Ignoring the pain in his body, he quickly made 3 hand signs, readying a jutsu he did not expect to use in this fight. He acknowledged that if he didn't use everything in his arsenal, he would lose his life. As his body crashed into the ceiling and began descending towards Ichigo, he saw that the flame surrounding him had disappeared completely. Instead, black chakra was oozing from Zangetsu. Getsuga, he said as began swinging the sword upwards, Tensho. Danzo watched unblinking as a massive blast of chakra shot toward him. The crescent-shaped blast completely engulfed him as he felt his entire body breaking down into nothingness. For the brief second that he could feel the jutsu impacting him, he could feel how it corroded everything within and without. A truly fearsome sword. Pity, he said as he materialized back on the ground, a safe distance away from Ichigo. You could have been a massive asset to the village. Yet, you had to waste all that due to your selfishness. Selfishness that finally drove you to treason. Danzo was looking at the ceiling or the lack thereof the entire time he was speaking. The attack had carved through the ground, through the various layers of the underground base. Sunlight now streamed in through the massive cut that had cleaved through the ceiling. He was now unblemished, unburnt, unbroken. All it cost him was a massive lump of chakra, and one of the eyes embedded in his hand. Izanagi truly was a masterful jutsu. It was a shame that it had such a steep cost. But then again, if it didn't cost them their damn eyes, who knows what the Uchiha would have done with such a jutsu in their repertoire. We have different definitions for the word treason. Traitor, snarked the boy right back as he leveled his sword at Danzo. In that brief lull, Danzo came to a decision. It was not worth wasting the remaining 9 eyes in his hand. The chakra cost for each Izanagi would wipe him out. At that point, even if he killed Ichigo, he would have to face other capable shinobi like Jiraiya, Kakashi, and worst of all, Hiruzen. If that happened, he would lose. On the other hand, if he had Ichigo backing him up, the both of them could subdue Hiruzen. Then all he would need to do would be to wait for several hours. By that time, the augmentation he received from Lord Hashirama's cells would allow him to cast the Kotoamatsukami once more. Danzo opened up Shisui's eye once more and looked at the mess of light that was Ichigo. Fighting through the headache, he triggered Kotoamatsukami. He felt the genjutsu taking hold of his target, but the next instant, it shattered due to a weird pulse of chakra that rippled through Ichigo's entire body. He watched on in stupor as the boy began laughing in earnest. Kotoa Matsukami was supposed to be undetectable. It made no sense to Danzo how Ichigo had broken through it. "Oh boy, I didn't expect you to panic and use it this quickly," the pink-haired Jonin said with mirth as he pulled out a pronged kunai from his pouch. Dread pooled in Danzo's stomach as he realized the extent of how much he had been outplayed. The entire fight was orchestrated for this single moment. Ichigo was waiting for Danzo to be at his lowest and use Shisui's jutsu. Hiruzen knew about the jutsu after all, so he would have avoided taking such a risk and had sent someone who could somehow break through it. How? He asked, mentally preparing himself. In a way, it turned out to be the right choice to use the jutsu when he had the reserves to continue fighting. "It's called an event listener," Ichigo nonchalantly replied as he threw the pronged kunai to the side. The next instant, 4 people appeared right next to the kunai. Genma, Rado, and Iwashi stood in a triangular formation while Hiruzen stood in the center of the formation, clad in his black battle attire. Hiruzen got out of the formation and nodded at the 3 shinobi accompanying him. The Hokage guard platoon saluted Hiruzen in return and got into formation once more. They immediately disappeared using their variation of the Hiraishin. Seeing no reason to hide anymore, Danzo completely removed all the bandages on his arm and laid the Sharingan bare for the world to see. He could see Hiruzen stiffen at the sight of the implants. He scoffed as Hiruzen seemed to have come to a decision. "It ends here, old friend," said Hiruzen. "We shall see," responded Danzo as he stared at his 2 opponents. This would not be an easy fight. Black Zetsu sensed a massive buildup. Interest peaked. He immediately used the mayfly technique to swim through the ground towards where 2 huge sources of chakra were clashing. As he swam through the base and reached Danzo's personal wing, he came across some sort of invisible barrier that he effortlessly passed through. He could feel a microscopic amount of his chakra being absorbed by the barrier and was confused by how it had managed to tag him in the first place. He observed the composition of the barrier and could see that it was similar to several barriers that absorbed any foreign chakra and bolstered themselves. The chakra that the barrier got from him would not even be a Kakaichu's worth of chakra, so he didn't worry much. Still, it was interesting that there existed a barrier that could even do something to him while he was using the mayfly technique. He immediately sent out a white Zetsu clone to Danzo's office to see if there was any information about this barrier over there. One positive thing was that he no longer needed to constantly fluctuate chakra from both his halves to fight the genjutsu. It seemed like this part of the base was not targeted by the technique. The Kurama girl's genjutsu didn't really target him because the girl used paintings as a medium and the genjutsu only targeted the scenario painted by her. Both his halves could not be considered humans, so he could easily evade this brand of genjutsu. Nonetheless, he had still been careful in the face of such potent genjutsu. Within seconds, Zetsu reached the site of the confrontation. He reached there just in time to see the 3rd Hokage make an entrance, ready to confront his longtime friend. Oh, how he liked to pit friends against each other. Even though he couldn't necessarily take credit for this particular bout, he would enjoy it nonetheless. Hiruzen Sarutobi and Ichigo Haruno stood on one side while Danzo stared at the both of them with a sour expression on his face. Sunlight was streaming in from the massive hole in the ceiling and lighting up the place perfectly. "Looks like we missed the first act," said his white half in a playful tone through their link. "Doesn't matter either way. We'll still see what Haruno is capable of," he responded. He had been curious about Haruno ever since the kid had killed Hirako. Zetsu had tried hard to get his hands on Hirako's corpse, but apparently, there was nothing left of the body. Such a waste. Nagato could have easily restored the body if they had found it. He could have put the Chimera technique to good use for their cause. He took a good look at Danzo and saw that there was not a single scratch on him while Ichigo had several tiny cuts here and there. Although, Danzo's bandages were nowhere to be seen, and he had his right eye closed for some reason. Right as he looked at his arm full of Sharingan, one of the eyes closed, cluing in Zetsu on what had happened. So the decrepit warmonger planned to abuse Izanagi to cling to life. It would be interesting to see how he pulled it off against these 2. Such a shame that those eyes in his arm can't see. He would have had massive spatial awareness then, White Zetsu said through his transmitted thoughts. He would have also melted his mind due to the overload. "You idiot," he transmitted back through their link. The both of them stopped communicating as it seemed like the fight was going to resume once more. I see that you finally grew a backbone, snidely said Danzo as he pulled out a kunai and coated it with wind-natured chakra. You mistake my kindness for weakness, Danzo, replied the third Hokage calmly as he got into a fighting stance. Unlike you, I am not delusional. You are weak. You let Orochimaru go. You let me go, even after I tried to get you assassinated. Is that how the leader of a village is supposed to act? Zetsu could clearly see that Danzo was indulging in such small talk to take a breather from whatever Ichigo had put him through. Lord Third, I hit him point blank with a Getsuga. He somehow appeared nearby without a scratch on him, and all healed up from his previous injuries. It is as we suspected, said Ichigo, interrupting the banter between the two old men. Izanagi, Sarutobi declared resolutely, with a tinge of disgust lacing his voice. Was it worth it, Danzo? Shisui could have easily stopped us from losing a major clan. Instead, here we are. The village is bereft of arguably our strongest remaining clan. All we have to show for that fiasco is you literally reaping their corpses for your benefit. As he was speaking, he put a hand on his back and began rapidly instructing Ichigo via hand signs. Zetsu was proficient in the hand signs used by all the villages. He could see that Sarutobi was relaying the plan to combat Izanagi to Ichigo while he was talking to Danzo. Don't make me laugh. What was to stop Shisui from changing his mind later on? And what guaranteed that nobody would develop a counter to it? Haruno here managed to do it. What was stopping any other Uchiha from doing it? No, it was for the best that I took the eye and let that wretched clan die. In their death, they served Konoha, spat Danzo. Is that how you justified desecrating Lord Hashirama's legacy as well? Asked Hiruzen, pointing towards Danzo's arm. Ha! You have your student to thank for that, laughed Danzo. Zetsu could see that all three of them had begun molding chakra, and were ready to spring at each other at a moment's notice. So, Lord Hokage, said Danzo, scoffing at the honorific, how do you plan on dealing with me this time? Without responding, Hiruzen threw 3 shurikens at Danzo and ran through a set of hand seals. The next instant, the 3 projectiles became thousands in number. The shuriken shadow clone technique bore upon Danzo as thousands of shuriken surrounded him. Danzo countered with a wind jutsu that blew away the oncoming shuriken, which all disappeared into a massive cloud of smoke that covered Danzo. Another burst of the wind jutsu blew all of the smoke away, but it was too late as Ichigo and Hiruzen were already upon Danzo. Zetsu watched with mounting humor as Danzo began desperately dodging for his life from Ichigo's sword and Hiruzen's fists. Just as Danzo dodged a vertical slash, Hiruzen stomped on the ground and pinned Danzo in place with several earthen spikes. Danzo immediately made a hand seal as the spikes impaled him. As he was immobile from the waist down, he could only watch as Ichigo beheaded him with a simple slash. Silence hung in the air for a second right as the toppled head hit the floor. The next instant, Danzo's severed head and body disappeared as he materialized right behind Hiruzen. He attempted to skewer Hiruzen with the blade of wind chakra that sprung from his kunai. Ichigo parried the wind-infused kunai and Hiruzen immediately kicked out with such force that Danzo's knee bent backward with a sickening crunch. Ichigo capitalized on this moment and impaled Danzo's chest with Zangetsu. Without caring about his injuries, Danzo leaned into the blade impaling him and spat out several air bullets. Hiruzen sank into the ground to avoid the jutsu. Ichigo, on the other hand, dodged to the side while dragging the impaled sword across Danzo's torso, almost cutting him in half. He did not escape unscathed though, as an air bullet clipped him in the shoulder. The cockroach is putting Izanagi to good use. But how long can he maintain the jutsu before he loses an eye? Pondered White Zetsu through their shared link. Definitely not as long as Obito can, Black Zetsu responded as he watched on. Ichigo jumped away from Danzo as he moved his injured shoulder around, testing his mobility. It did not seem to be a deep wound, as he shrugged it off and gripped his sword once more with both hands. Meanwhile, Danzo's injuries just disappeared in an instant. Before he could do anything though, Hiruzen's hands burst out from the ground and held Danzo's body in place as the earth below him rose like a pillar. The pillar of earth shot upwards with great speed as Danzo struggled on top of it due to Hiruzen's hold on him. The pillar, with Danzo on top of it, crashed into an undamaged part of the ceiling with a deafening sound. Blood and gore spattered out of the point of impact as Danzo was sandwiched into a mere smear on the ceiling. The pillar lowered a bit, only to show a gory mess on top of it. Hiruzen shot out of the pillar and joined Ichigo at once. He placed a glowing hand on Ichigo's shoulder as green chakra covered the shallow wound and began closing it up. The next moment, Danzo materialized at the foot of the pillar that squashed him seconds ago. He looked at it in distaste and turned towards the duo that had almost killed him thrice within a minute. Zetsu sensed Danzo's chakra fluctuate as one eye closed, indicating the end of the Izanagi. Overall, the jutsu itself had taken a lot of chakra out of him. Going by his current chakra level, Zetsu calculated that Danzo would run out of chakra by the time all his extra eyes were used up. That too, given that he did not use other major techniques that drained his chakra even more. A full minute. That is impressive. Obito's Izanagi lasts longer though, said White Zetsu. I'm more interested in why he's not using his right eye. He could have escaped all that if he had it open, said Black Zetsu as he replayed the fight so far in his mind. The moment Danzo peeked at his arm to check the closed eye, Hiruzen and Ichigo exchanged glances and nodded in understanding. They resumed working in tandem as both of them tried to catch Danzo by surprise. Both of them began targeting Danzo's arm, hoping to damage the eyes in it before he could use them to trigger another Izanagi. As he tried to dodge once more, Ichigo's sword struck true and lopped his arm full of Sharingan off. Unfortunately for the duo, both the arm and Danzo vanished, signifying that he had triggered another Izanagi successfully. Seemingly growing tired of being ganged up on, Danzo began running through a set of hand seals. The moment he began that specific sequence, Hiruzen and Ichigo began doing the same thing. 3 hands hit the floor at once and the occupants were surrounded by a cloud of smoke. The smoke cleared to reveal the new additions to the fight. A massive tapir-like creature stood in front of Danzo. The creature known as the Baku lifted its trunk as it let out a loud trumpet, challenging its foes. Responding to the challenge was a mighty roar from an armored polar bear that rivaled the Baku in size. Unlike Ichigo's renowned personal summon Shirokuma, this specific bear was devoid of any weapons and was wearing a heavier set of armor. It was also way larger. Zetsu wondered if the beast was the boss summon of the polar bears. In contrast to the gargantuan beasts, Hiruzen's summon, the Monkey King Enma was only slightly taller than the humans on the battlefield. Enma took a look around the room and nodded in approval. Another rat inside the village, eh? Remember Hiruzen. This time, you will not show mercy, stated Enma, reminding Hiruzen of the time they had let Orochimaru slip past them. Hiruzen nodded wordlessly as the monkey summon transformed into a black staff with gold-capped ends. At a wordless signal, the Baku began to inhale, creating a suction force that began drawing in everything in the vicinity. Ichigo immediately stepped behind his armored bear, using it to shield himself from the pull. Hiruzen slammed the adamantine staff to the ground and used it as leverage to stay put as the Baku kept the inhalation going. Danzo capitalized on this and moved to the side, attempting to flank them. But before he could reach a vantage point, an arc of black chakra engulfed him continuously, destroying everything in its wake. It was definitely not as big as the one Zetsu sensed previously, but he could tell that it was the same jutsu. Fortunately for the old fool, he had performed the hand seal for the Izanagi beforehand and was able to survive once more. Capitalizing on the jutsu, Danzo materialized a good distance behind both of them and unleashed his vacuum serial waves jutsu. Zetsu watched with interest as the blades of wind were given a massive boost both to their speed and size due to the suction jutsu pulling them in. Your memory has gotten spotty, my friend, roared Hiruzen as he slammed his hand on the ground, summoning a Rashomon gate in front of him. The jutsu stuck the Rashomon with a loud scraping noise and kept trying to bypass the gate. Danzo scowled as the jutsu failed to destroy the barrier. Go, Yama, said Ichigo. Upon his signal, the armored polar bear barreled towards the Baku. The suction force just increased its speed as it sprinted on 4 legs towards the source of the pull. With a mighty roar, the bear tacked the Baku and moved with such force that both the animals crashed through the wall, moving out of sight. We fought in wars together. I am aware of your tricks, said Hiruzen. Danzo did not respond and looked at his arm once again as another eye closed. Zetsu did a quick count and saw that he had run through 4 eyes already. Hiruzen and Ichigo set upon Danzo once more, black staff and black sword lashing out at their foe. Zetsu watched on as they quickly overwhelmed him and forced him to trigger another Izanagi. By now, he should know that he doesn't have a chance of winning, right? Said White Zetsu. The fool knows that he is doomed. But it seems like he won't be going down quietly. This is a battle of attrition. He expects them to accumulate enough damage and run out of chakra before he runs out of eyes to sacrifice, he said. Seems pointless. Didn't you hear him? He thinks Hiruzen is not fit to be the Hokage. In his mind, if he gets rid of the village's biggest weakness as his last act, he will gladly die, Black Zetsu said as he had already started plotting what to do with the result of this fight. Zetsu could hear the summons fighting in the distance, but that noise died out soon after. He could sense that the Baku had been taken out. The polar bear unsummoned itself after it was done with its task, presumably under Ichigo's orders. If they both die, can we get Obito to take over the new Hokage? Asked White Zetsu right as the adamantine staff hit Danzo's head with such force that his neck twisted backwards. Depends on who it is, he responded right as the adamantine staff extended and shot towards Danzo. Zetsu chuckled in amusement as he understood the duo's game plan. This was quickly turning out to be one of the most entertaining fights he had witnessed throughout his long life. He didn't count Indra, Asura, and their reincarnations, of course. Those fights were on a whole different level. Danzo moved sideways as he dodged the expanding staff. He expected Hiruzen to retract the weapon, but instead, Hiruzen let go of the staff and made a shadow clone. At that moment, the staff began to retract. He was visibly surprised as it began retracting on the opposite end. He glanced back to see that Ichigo had caught the other end and was reeling the staff back in. That 1 second of distraction cost Danzo, as Hiruzen and his shadow clone released two different techniques at the same time. Hiruzen unleashed a massive tidal wave while his shadow clone began pumping obscene amounts of lightning chakra into the wave. He couldn't hide behind a wall as Ichigo was right behind him, so Danzo jumped upwards, attempting to escape the electrocuting tidal wave. Ichigo stood atop the pillar that had previously squished Danzo, staff held overhand like a javelin. Lightning arced over the staff as he pushed more chakra into the lightning nature chakra flow. With an almighty heave, Ichigo threw the lightning javelin. The lightning-coated staff struck Danzo's spine with a sickening crunch, as it speared him right into the electrocuted water below. There goes another eye, mocked White Zetsu. Black Zetsu could only agree as he saw the trap that Danzo got caught in. They truly were wasting huge amounts of chakra just to drive the old fool into a trap. But they had no other option other than to go for the kill with their moves and force him to use the jutsu. The next 2 minutes went on in a similar vein as Hiruzen and Ichigo demolished Danzo non-stop with their impeccable teamwork. The third Hokage easily read the flow of the battle and was able to aid his younger subordinate and counter Danzo whenever he tried to get on the offensive. Danzo kept leaning into the attacks to take advantage of his pseudo-immortality and attack them at unexpected times. Even that did not work in his favor due to Hiruzen being familiar with his fighting style. It was not without any results though, as Ichigo sported cuts and bruises here and there, but nothing fatal. Hiruzen in contrast was relatively unscathed, but he seemed to be tiring out as well. What surprised Zetsu was the fire release chakra mode that Ichigo began using. The more he saw of the fight, the more he was convinced that Ichigo would make an excellent pawn. Either via Edo Tensei or by manipulation and coercion. 6 minutes had passed since the three had begun fighting. Adding the eye that had been used up already, Danzo was now down 7 eyes. Something must have happened at that moment, as both Hiruzen and Ichigo hid their mouths and whispered something that only they could hear. They immediately burst into action as Hiruzen ran through a bunch of seals and stomped hard on the ground. 2 massive walls of earth rose at once, trapping Danzo into a narrow tunnel. At the same time, a massive amount of black chakra oozed from Ichigo's sword. From the sheer output of the thing, it looked like Ichigo was pouring a good chunk of his remaining chakra into the thing. Sighing in resignation, Danzo made the hand seal to trigger another Izanagi. He was just in time, as black chakra consumed the newly created earth tunnel and everything inside it. All that was left of that area was a deep gouge in the ground that looked eerily familiar to Zetsu. Is that, questioned his white counterpart. Incomplete, but on the correct track, he responded as he got a good feel of the chakra composition of the jutsu. Zetsu's sensory abilities were a notch above any of the puny shinobi running around, and he could clearly feel what the jutsu was. Or at least what it was trying to emulate. Right as Danzo materialized again, The adamantine staff cloned itself and assembled into a lattice, trapping Danzo within an unbreakable prison. At the same moment, 3 Hiruzen Sarutobis stood together and ran through different hand seals while molding massive amounts of chakra. They unleashed the cooperation jutsu without preamble, engulfing Danzo and his unbreakable prison in a sea of flames. 2 of them spat large jets of fire while the third one used a wind jutsu to fan the flames and spread it throughout the battlefield. Danzo materialized and got immediately submerged by the rapidly spreading flame. He tried once more and got burned into ashes the next second. Within seconds, the entire place was aflame. The fire didn't seem to let up, still being fueled by the third and his clones. Soon enough, only 2 places were untouched. One was the place where the Hokage, his clones, and Ichigo were, and the other place was the very top of the earthen pillar that had previously splattered Danzo. To Zetsu, it seemed to be timed in such a way that Danzo materialized atop the pillar right as the clock struck 60 seconds since the Izanagi started. Right as the 8th eye began to close, a flaming arrow punched out of the sea of flames, heading towards Danzo at blinding speeds. Ichigo, wreathed in the explosive aura of his fire-release chakra mode, was right next to Danzo in the blink of an eye. Danzo was in the middle of performing the hand sign for the Izanagi as his right arm was lopped off at the shoulder. The fiery aura surrounding Ichigo and his blade ensured that the wound was cauterized in an instant. For a second, it looked like Danzo considered sacrificing Shisui's eye to trigger the Izanagi. Alas, the choice was taken out of his hand. As Hiruzen jumped out of the ground, arm outstretched, he plucked Shisui's eye right out of the socket and plopped it into a jar as Danzo fell from the pillar, devoid of his right arm and his right eye. The whole fight was leading to this moment as Hiruzen and Ichigo had been getting used to the exact timing of the Izanagi. They had finally put an end to it, as Danzo crashed several meters away from his felled arm. To everyone's surprise, the arm bulged unnaturally and burst out with trees. All of a sudden, the Mokuton ran rampant, without most of the Sharingan and Danzo's vitality to counteract its own. Within seconds, instead of the arm, stood a tall tree. The center of the trunk had Hashirama's face jutting out of it, with the last 2 remaining Sharingan eyes blazing in the immobile sculpture's eye sockets. All 3 of the fighters looked at the tree in a stupor before the Hokage shook his head in dismay and turned towards Danzo, ignoring the tree for the moment. "I hope you repent for your misdeeds in the afterlife, old friend," said Hiruzen as he pulled out a kunai and suffused it with wind-natured chakra, just like Danzo did throughout the fight. "Repent? Why should I repent?" Danzo coughed and wiped the blood flowing from his empty eye socket before continuing. "I did everything for the sake of the village. If there is one thing I regret, it would be letting you become the Hokage. I let that opportunity slip by my hands, and watched as you led the village to ruin." Danzo stumbled to his feet as he looked at the third Hokage with hatred burning in his one sole eye. "Why now, of all times? You were content, letting me do as I pleased all this time," he said as he touched his cauterized shoulder and examined his wound. "You are a threat to the village. I don't plan on repeating my mistakes anymore. Not when I know for sure that you have been colluding with traitors and attacking loyal shinobi," said Hiruzen with grim determination. "A threat, am I? You are the Hokage. You found a threat. What are you going to do about it then? Either you get rid of the threat like a Hokage should, or die here as a failure unfit for the mantle," shouted Danzo as he placed his good hand on his chest. A Fuinjutsu seal appeared on his chest, and it seemed like Danzo was going to trigger the suicide jutsu. Before he could do so, a kunai impacted his stomach, with a sealing tag hanging from its ring. Whatever Danzo was trying to do got disrupted as the sealing tag interacted with the suicide seal. "Good job, Ichigo. Now that a minute has passed, you can't come back, Danzo. I suppose it is farewell, old friend," said the Hokage as he appeared right next to Danzo and stabbed him in the heart with the wind-natured chakra blade. The dying old man coughed a dollop of blood and laughed maniacally in his last moments. "That's it. Don't hesitate. Never hesi." Danzo never got to finish his last words as Hiruzen severed his head, looking at his fallen comrade in distaste. Hiruzen stood still for several moments, just staring at Danzo's corpse. Meanwhile, Ichigo had slumped on the ground, exhausted due to all the chakra he had been throwing around. After a few more seconds, Hiruzen threw the tiny jar containing Shisui's eye to Ichigo. "Seal it. Place trackers. Guard it for now. We will decide later what to do with it, Hiruzen said as he walked to the tree and plucked the 2 remaining Sharingan out of the tree. The face of Hashirama jutting out from the tree closed its eyes once the eyes were out. It looked serene, without the blazing red eyes marring its blank expression. It's ironic, isn't it? The last stand of root resulted in a massive tree being planted in the center of the village. Ichigo scoffed as he began inscribing seals on the vial containing the Sharingan. I'm of half a mind to destroy it. I'll get Tenzo to check on it first before we do anything. If he can study its composition and improve his own Mokuton, then it'll be great for us, he said as he placed the other 2 eyes in a different jar and put it away in a storage seal. Hiruzen then looked at Danzo's corpse and hummed thoughtfully. Destroy the body with a Getsuga. I'd burn it with fire, but I don't want even ashes to remain of this travesty. Yes sir. Zetsu swam through the ground and made his way back outside. On his way, he saw a purple-haired Anbu woman leading a team that corralled the captured root agents. A droopy-eyed shinobi with a katana was leading another squad that was rounding up the captured children. He moved past them unseen as his numerous white Zetsu clones returned to him with the information they had managed to plunder from the base. He still didn't get anything about the weird barrier he initially encountered, but there was nothing he could do about that. His mind went back to the fight he had witnessed. Ichigo Haruno was more of a threat than he had initially thought. He had always wondered how a wet behind-the-ears brat had managed to take out Hirako, who was once a peer of the Sannin. He had gotten his answers now. The fire-release chakra mode would have given him enough speed and power to keep up with Hirako, while the sword Zangetsu would have helped overcome the tide. From what he observed, both of his trump cards drained a lot of chakra. It was still impressive nonetheless, for a young shinobi to have enough chakra to throw such jutsu around without getting drained completely. Zetsu once again pondered on what exactly the Getsuga Tensho was. Catching his train of thought, his white counterpart spoke up at once through their telepathic link. It was very similar to the failed attempts of Mew. I'd say he succeeded where Mew failed, he replied. He could clearly sense the chakra composition of the attack, and it was reminiscent of the time they were spying on Mew, the second Tsuchikage. So, 4 elements? Questioned his white half. Mew tried to take the dust release one step further by adding another element to it, but all his experiments failed and he eventually gave up. Definitely more than 3 elements. From what I could sense, the sword was pumping out chakra of different elements at the same time and using a catalyst to mix them. It then released the volatile mixture as a blast of chakra. That is dangerous. Black Zetsu nodded as he agreed with his counterpart. The sword was dangerous. He was sure that at least 4 elements were being mixed, possibly lacking a 5th element and a yin-yang component. Or it might be oversaturated with yin, which would mostly be the reason for the black color and the red tinge on the edges. It would also explain the massive chakra drain of the jutsu. It is volatile. Not polished, not stable, but it does the job. I would say that it is stronger than Jinten when he dumps huge amounts of chakra into the jutsu, he said. What if he improves it with all the elements? Asked White Zetsu. If he ever reaches close to that point, we get rid of him. Although, I doubt anyone would be able to make truth-seeking orbs without the sage's chakra, he replied in a grim tone. The existing imperfect mix had a corrosive effect that obliterated everything in its path, but it was nowhere near the level of the truth-seeking orbs which could affect even souls. Ichigo Haruno was a new player on the board that needed to be reined in by any means. Zetsu ruminated on all the details he knew about the boy and came to a decision. They would need to make a plan to kill him and steal the sword later on, or to bring him over to their side. He had an inkling that Ichigo will most likely be in the running for the cage seat after the old man. It did require him to be older, so he could not exactly say what would happen. If the old fool retired quickly, then they would place someone with experience on the seat. Someone like Jiraiya or Kakashi. Hiruzen had gotten weaker in his old age, compared to how he was in his prime. Zetsu had witnessed all the wars with great interest after all. Danzo didn't dare to go against Hiruzen in his prime. In any case, it would be beneficial to have another cage under their control. An added bonus would be that they would have easy access to the Nine Tails too. All it would take was holding the younger sister hostage to get Ichigo under their control. It was a pretty easy weakness to exploit. On the other hand, he could do what he did to Obito. He could get the girl killed and make it look like it was Konoha's fault. It would be easy to manipulate the teen as he drowned in misery. It wouldn't be much work as well, since he was already planning on monitoring the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. It was his good fortune that the girl was on the same team as the host. It was like killing two birds with one stone. Zetsu was a patient being. He could wait and enact his plans since he had been waiting for so long already. He didn't know how long his pawns would be patient though. Both Obito and Nagato were nearing a stage where they would no longer work in the shadows and move out in the open. Zetsu finally reached the surface and crept up on the team monitoring the root base. There was no bloodbath due to this specific team. He had already seen them when they started the operation, but it seemed like the whole ordeal had drained them of all energy. The Kurama clan girl was still maintaining the mass genjutsu with a painting of hers. Right next to her sat the Mokuton wielder, slumped due to the amount of chakra he had spent. He had an irrational urge to just nab the Mokuton wielder and use him as a battery for creating and empowering the white Zetsus. He let that feeling go because it would be pointless at this point in time. Once the wielder got stronger, Zetsu would come for him. He would make for a better battery then. A pale kid was seated next to the two, coordinating with critters made out of ink. He had seen the inky creations running around the base, presumably acting as a scouting force and an information relay for the other squads inside the base. Sarutobi's son and Hataki were guarding the three linchpins of the operation along with an Anbu squad. Seeing nothing much of interest anymore, Zetsu began traveling away from the village at great speed. He planned on returning after the security became lax. If he could make a play for Shisui's eye at the correct opportunity, it would aid him more in his endeavors. He wondered whether he should let Obito know of all the events that had happened, or whether he should leave out some information. At the end of the day, everyone else was a pawn and the only thing that mattered was freeing his mother from her prison. Jiraiya walked leisurely into the base and paid careful attention to everything he saw. Either someone else had beaten them to the punch, or they had intruded during some twisted experiment. The walls were splattered with blood and the floor was littered with corpses, and he hadn't even started yet. Someone else had done it for him. He had already flooded the base with scout toads and was waiting for them to point him in the right direction. Anko and Hana were accompanying an Anbu squad and scouring a different part of the base. The old man thought that such a force was necessary, but Jiraiya didn't think so. He knew that Orochimaru was spotted in a base almost a country away. Still, for a change, it was nice to have other people shoulder half the work for him. Ever since their team broke up, he had always worked on his lonesome. He walked past numerous labs with dead scientists and experimental subjects and couldn't help but wonder whether this was one of Orochimaru's maniacal traps. As he was inspecting one of the bloodied labs, he felt a scout toad dispelling. He burst into action the next moment, swiftly traveling to the location where the toad was last present. Within a few moments, he was in front of a large laboratory. Inside the lab was the answer to why the base was in such a sorry state. The target, Shin Uchiha, was scrambling in a hurry, packing everything into sealing scrolls with one arm. To the side were discarded clothes, dripping with blood. Shin stopped abruptly as one of his many eyes caught sight of Jiraiya. Jiraiya of the Sannin, he snarled as he took a defensive stance, ready for battle. Shin Uchiha, eh? Jiraiya asked, making air quotes when he said Uchiha. Are you sure that you aren't Orochimaru's kid instead? You look pasty enough to pass for one. How dare you make fun of the Uchiha? I will show you the power of the Uchiha clan, the deluded moron snarled as the implanted eyes throughout his body whirled in agitation. Sure, if you say so, Jiraiya sighed as he lost all motivation to ham up his own bit. There was no use doing so against this poor sap. Jiraiya looked at his opponent in pity. Shin was insane, there was nothing else to say about it. He was incredibly weak and had nothing going for him. The insane youth thought that having so many Sharingan implanted in him gave him some major advantage. Shin was entirely dependent on his Mangekyo ability, which allowed him to telekinetically manipulate his tools and weapons. There was no Izanagi that he had been warned against, no major genjutsu proficiency, and next to zero ninjutsu displayed. All he did was attack with the chakra scalpel in close range. When Jiraiya moved out of range, he was attacked by flying knives, which he quickly deduced to be Shin's Mangekyo ability. It might have been enough to get rid of the scrubs in the base, but it was nowhere near enough to deal with Jiraiya. Maybe he would have gotten stronger later on. It was his misfortune to have come across Jiraiya at this point. He was also missing an arm, which had been gifted to Danzo. All in all, it didn't take Jiraiya more than a couple of minutes to demolish his opponent. Give up, kid. You were in the process of cleaning out this base and betraying Orochimaru, right? Come with me to Konoha. I can guarantee you that we'll smoothen things for you if you manage to give us information about Orochimaru, he appealed. The same village that branded Itachi Uchiha as a missing nin. Never, spat Shin as a grayish barrier began swirling around him, centered on his right eye. Jiraiya didn't wait for whatever jutsu it was and dashed toward Shin way faster than the teen could react. A blue sphere of chakra had already formed in his hand and was spinning rapidly. As his Rasengan pierced through the spherical barrier, he could feel the jutsu trying to transport the contents of the barrier somewhere else. Alas, Shin seemed to be too inexperienced to instantaneously use the spacetime jutsu. Before the jutsu could transport anything, the Rasengan slammed onto his torso and ground his insides to a pulp. With a resounding crash, Shin was bodily thrown to the wall. Jiraiya walked up to Shin and saw that his torso was caved in due to the Rasengan. He quickly checked the vitals and concluded that Shin was dead. What a nutjob, he mumbled as he went about sealing the body. For all his talk, Shin didn't know anything about the Uchiha. Or else he could have easily made this fight a massive headache for Jiraiya. But then again, a fake was a fake. Jiraiya wanted to avoid killing him, but in a way, it worked out for the best. All the clans would have been up in arms if they saw a dude walking with multiple implants like Shin. Moreover, if word got out that they had someone whose genes would allow transplantation of Kekkei Genkai without any chance of rejection, there would be war. He wondered how Orochimaru kept this quiet for so long. The journey back from the trashed base was quick and uneventful. They had rushed back at top speed since Jiraiya wanted to be there to help in case the fallout of Danzo's takedown was too much. It took them less than a day to get back to the village. A toad was waiting in the Hokage's office to reverse summon him just in case they needed Jiraiya immediately. Thankfully, they didn't need to use it. He couldn't have brought in the rest of the squad with the reverse summoning, so he was glad to stay with them just in case Orochimaru popped up somehow. Hey sensei, Jiraiya waved at his teacher as he jumped into the Hokage's office. Kakashi and Ichigo were already there, and interestingly, their usual postures were reversed. Kakashi looked fairly okay while Ichigo seemed absolutely spent. I see that you're back, Jiraiya. Sit rep please, said his teacher. The next instant, the hidden Anbu guards vacated the office and the security seals activated. Jiraiya spent the next couple of minutes recounting his adventure. So yeah, that was it. The target had already trashed the base in his escape attempt, so we didn't get much out of it. We didn't disturb anything, so it would still look like he struck out on his own, said Jiraiya as he was done with his debrief. I won't count on it. We hit Danzo, Kabuto, and Shin at the same time. Orochimaru will not be fooled by anything when things are coordinated to this level. Without his spies, he wouldn't find out about Danzo immediately, but the fact that Kabuto went dark will spook him for sure. It's better if we expect him to connect the dots. I am not sure if this invasion will still happen or not, but it is better if we prepare ourselves, said Hiruzen-sensei. Yeah, he is spiteful enough to go through with it. Anyway, how are things on your end? Asked Jiraiya. Things went as planned. I don't know whether it is a good thing or not. A part of me was praying that we were wrong about Danzo. But alas, I was too blind to reality. Danzo did everything we expected him to do. That didn't make the fight easy in any way, but Ichigo managed to do everything he promised to do. Once I was on the field, it was only a matter of time before we got him. I'll show you the battle later, Hiruzen-sensei sighed at the end. So all your traps worked, eh? Good job, kid, praised Jiraiya. I mean, I did test the anti-Sharingan measures quite extensively with Kakashi when I was developing it. And any seal that can break free from Yakumo's Kekkei Genkai can break free from practically any other genjutsu. It took a lot of time to make, but it was worth it, said the tired boy. I want to take a look at the seals later on, said Jiraiya. He had always been intrigued by Ichigo's unique approach to fuinjutsu. Using existing fuinjutsu techniques is always a matter of memorization, control, and practice. Creating new seals was a different ballgame altogether. Creating a new sealing approach was something practically unheard of outside the Uzumaki clan. Knock yourself out. Let me know if you can manage to figure anything out, the kid said with a smirk. Jiraiya grumbled in annoyance since he knew that it would be no easy task. He had tried to decipher the seals that Ichigo had made public, but he quickly realized that they were encrypted. He spent a good amount of time trying to decode it, but he hadn't made much progress so far. It did give him the idea to encrypt his own seals, so he'd take what he got. Also, nobody else spotted the fire chakra mode, right? Your bounty will shoot up if Kumo found out about it, said Jiraiya. Nope. Only Lord Third saw me using it. And he already knew about it, so we can still surprise people with it, said Ichigo. Normally I'd want to let it be known that we had such a technique in our hands. It would be a good deterrent, but your Zangetsu alone paints a target on you, so I'd rather not. In any case, the age of us old fossils is coming to a close. I should never have sat back on this seat after Minato passed, but nobody else was ready, said Hiruzen-sensei as he glared at him. Jiraiya shrugged nonchalantly. He was never one for such a huge responsibility. So how's the fallout? I need to check with my contacts to see how much information got out as well, said Jiraiya. It's bad. We found records of kids being kidnapped or coerced into root, like Torun Aburame. They all need to go through intense rehab before we can even think of integrating them into the force. Some would be unsalvageable even. Many clans are pissed off already. The silver lining is that nothing about the Sharingan theft is known to the others. But his disgusting experiment with the Mokuton can't be hidden. The tree has already grown large enough. A lot of vegetation has popped up around it as well. It hasn't even been a whole day. I'm reluctant to cut it down though. It can prove to be useful for Tenzo. I'll check it out later with Ma and Pa. If the growth is as abnormal as you say, it might be a nexus for natural energy, he said. I was going to order you to do that anyway. Watch over Tenzo as he tries to understand how that tree came into being. I believe that his Mokuton will jump leaps and bounds if he figures out what makes it click. If he manages to realize his potential, we would have a strong shinobi protecting our village, said the Hokage. Yeah, I'll do it. We don't want him messing around with senjutsu unsupervised and turning into stone, mumbled Jiraiya. Good. I have Kaharu and Homura under house arrest too. Depending on the results of the investigations on their involvement with Danzo, it would either be a forced retirement, or something more serious and permanent. I have been too lenient with my friends. Both of them are fired regardless of what we find out. I myself will retire after all this comes to a close, he sighed. So you've decided who will take up the hat? Jiraiya asked. Not yet. This leads us to the next topic. Tsunade needs to know. She won't be happy with what has been done with her grandfather's cells, but she deserves to know. I'll write up a letter. Find her, deliver it to her, and bring her back with you. You sure she'll return? He asked skeptically. I let her off the hook since she was hurting. But she has to see some things through. I know what to say to her. She'll be here, he said, looking way older than he already was. If you say so. Now what do we do about this? Asked Jiraiya, placing the scroll containing Shin's body on the table. His teacher sighed once more despondently and got up from his seat. I had Ichigo seal up Shisui's eye. It's an incredible resource that I don't want others to know about. It also can't be used repeatedly without Lord Hashirama's cells. It will be our safety net against insurmountable odds. I have a key, Ichigo naturally can open it as well, but if we can't trust the person who revamped our village's barriers, then we are too far gone anyways. No offense my boy, he said. None taken, Lord Third, chirped the boy. Kakashi has a key since he knows how to properly use the Sharingan. He is the designated user for the eye if we ever need to unseal it. I will give you the last key. Keep it safe. I will hand over the master key to the person I crown as the next Hokage. Ichigo, please explain the mechanism to Jiraiya, he said. Well, as you can infer, the master key can open the seal on its own. The Hokage will have that seal key with them. The three lesser keys are there just in case the Hokage falls in battle or is unreachable during the emergency. All of these keys are needed at the same time to open the safe. Of course, none of these keys are physical. I will impart the Fuinjutsu keys to the bearers and include sufficient anti-theft measures in them. The location of the eye itself will have several monitoring and arresting seals, he said. I don't know why you want me to use it, Lord Third. I can barely function with one eye, mumbled Kakashi, alluding to the chakra drain of the implanted Sharingan. Oh hush, Kakashi. You are one of my most capable shinobi. Moreover, this is where Shin's body ties in, said Hiruzen-sensei. Wait, you want to use it? Asked a frowning Jiraiya. I don't want to stoop to the levels of Orochimaru and Danzo, but it will be incredibly stupid of us to not study how his cells work. No live subjects at all costs. And no desecration of any graves to replicate long-lost Kekkei Genkai. I'll only allow Tsunade to work on it. It's better if information about the corpse doesn't spread around. For now, we'll seal it alongside Shisui's eye. But if she can learn something from it, then we can find a way to reduce the chakra drain from Kakashi's implant. It'll be another boon to us. Jiraiya pondered on that for a moment and nodded. It's a slippery slope though, sensei, he said at last. That's why we won't be doing anything now. I will leave it to the judgment of the new Hokage. But I do want strict measures to be taken so that we don't let our greed get the better of us. I'd normally tell you to burn the corpse and be done with it. But a war is coming to our doorstep. I can't say for sure that other villages won't join forces with Orochimaru. We will be careful not to fall to similar levels of depravity. But if we can just facilitate successful prosthetics using these cells, I'll be happy with it. In any case, it'll be ideal to dispose of the body before war comes knocking. We don't want anyone to get their hands on this. It will be bad. Even if the clans within the village know of Shin, it'll be bad. We'll focus on prosthetic limbs and Kakashi's eye, nothing else, said Hiruzen-sensei with grim determination. Alright, the sooner we burn this to a crisp, the better, said Jiraiya. Any chance that you'll take up the hat, Jiraiya? Hiruzen-sensei asked abruptly. No chance, Jiraiya shot back without hesitation. If there was nobody else to take the role, then he might have done it. But there was no urgency, and Jiraiya was happy with how he was. Hiruzen-sensei then looked at Kakashi and Ichigo intently before switching gears once more. Alright. Ichigo, I'll call you in the evening for the sealing. Take rest until then. Team 15 will be instrumental against Orochimaru's forces. Train hard. If any of you need any advice, come talk to me. You're dismissed for now. Yes sir. We'll be ready, saluted Ichigo as he left the office. Kakashi, the same goes for you. I want you to prepare your genin properly. They aren't ready for what's coming, he said. Yes Lord Third, said Kakashi before he too left the room. Jiraiya, are you sure that you don't want to meet young Naruto right now? Once we get busy with this, you won't have much time, asked his sensei with a disappointed tone. Jiraiya froze for a moment as his mind began swimming with thoughts about Naruto. He was reluctant to take anyone under his wing. He feared that even meeting Naruto would subject the kid to the accursed prophecy. In his mind, all his students so far had met with grisly ends due to the prophecy. Minato, dead. Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan, dead. He didn't have the heart in him to teach another youngling and then outlive his student. All of them shone brightly before the world snuffed them out. Fate tested them to see if they were worthy of the prophecy, and they all failed. The weight of the prophecy bore down heavily on him. He didn't want to subject anyone else to its non-existent mercy. But he knew that it was inevitable. From what he heard from his sensei, Naruto had grown up to be a kind-hearted young man despite all that happened to him. He'd let the kid have his peace before he subjected his cursed presence on him. No, sensei. A genin's life is something to be cherished. He'll never get this phase of his life back. Let him enjoy his youth for a little longer for now. I'll make him the Toad Summoner before the third exam, just in case, he sighed. Hiruzen-sensei scrutinized him for a few moments before he too sighed and shook his head. Okay. Let's get started then. I have a few tasks for you apart from the ones I told you about. We have an invasion to thwart, he said as he then pulled out a map of the village. The chapter is end here now. We will meet with another chapter, so don't forget to subscribe our channel for more content like this.